Well, good morning. Today we have a 2009 Honda Ridgeline, and it's here for some routine maintenance. We're going to do a timing belt, water pump kit, and spark plugs today. So I'll bring you along in little short clips at strategic places. Let's get going. So remove the Serpentine belt. It makes it easier if you have the Serpentine belt tool like this here. And I think it's 15 mil. Disconnect the power steering return line here and cap it so you don't lose any power steering fluid, because we're going to move the power steering pump over to the back of the engine bay out of the way, and then we're going to proceed to start removing covers. We've got to lift this on the hoist. I'm not sure if we have to support this engine or not, but we'll find out. So there are two small bolts on the bottom of the water pump, or power steering pump I should say. Undo those two bolts and lift the assembly out. Now I did have to loosen off this little 6 mil bolt here, move the air sea line slightly to the right in order to get enough clearance to get it up. So now we can take the idler wheel off, or the tensioner off, and the upper timing cover components off. So the belt tensioner has one main bolt, 14 mil head through the center, and a small 12 millimeter headed bolt through the bottom. So remove both of them, leave the bolt in, turn inside, turn it 90 degrees and pull it straight up to get it out of the engine bay. So now that opens up a considerable amount more room. Let's pull the upper valve covers off, or timing covers off. So remove the two upper timing covers. There are 5 retaining bolts, 3 across the bottom, 2 at the top, 1 wiring harness on the front clip, this little green guy here, and then the back one has a like a channel that the wiring harness runs in. You have to unclip it. Belt doesn't look too bad considering this thing's got 200k on it. It's never been changed, so he says anyways, but it's definitely time. Okay, we're going to raise it up and take the harmonic balancer off. Okay, so you need a holding fixture for the crankshaft pulley. I have a homemade one out of a welded fitting on this 1.5 inch wrench I found on the road, but you can buy factory ones, but I like this one because it will go against the tie rod end or the axle shaft, and this bolt is extremely tight. I've already cracked it loose. Most of the time an impact gun won't take it off. So there's the balancer off. It just wiggles off. It's a little bit stuck on there sometimes. Small pinch bar behind it, gently rocking it, usually comes off. Now there's several bolts down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'll take this lower cover off. Pay attention to this slinger and the dowel on the keyway. Make sure the key doesn't fall out. So there are 7 retainers for the lower timing cover, and you can get those off pretty easily. So now I see that belt runs behind the motor mount, so we're going to have to support the engine with a fixture or from the bottom. I like to support it from the top, that way I can raise and lower the vehicle. So we'll get set up for that now. So there's a universal fixture for holding or supporting the engine from the top. Honda was good enough to put a lift hook on it. This rod's not quite long enough to reach it with this setup, so I just put a small piece of chain. So I've got the motor mount removed or unattached here, and I'm going to try and take this motor mount bracket off. There's 3 bolts, I believe. All the bolts have 14 millimeter heads, so we'll see if we can get this bolt bracket off without taking all this computer and everything. I took the cruise control servo out of here. There it is over there. So I had to remove the engine ECM bracket, disconnect all these cables and connections. Of course the battery's disconnected, and the fuse box can sit here, I believe, but we're going to need to take this motor mount off because there is one bolt right up in here that you can't get a socket on, because, and they actually don't even really need this engine support because there's a lower motor mount and it's actually holding it right in the spot. So we'll take this bracket off and then we should be okay. So once that motor mount's out of the way, there's the bolt there, right there. It's recessed in there. You can't get a socket on it with the ratchet because the motor mount's in the way. Okay, so with that mount out of the way, there's considerably more room anyway, so we're going to line up the marks now before we remove the belt and the idlers and make sure all the marks are lined up. So reinstall the crank bolt with the spacer and snug it up, and then turn the engine clockwise until the crank mark, I've whitened it with white paint, lines up with the casting arrow on the back of the oil pump housing or the front engine housing. And then we're going to let it down and see if the camshafts are lined up. So I had to turn it another 360 degrees. So there's two timing marks on this front pulley. There's one here and one down at the bottom. So look for the one timing mark that's on the back pulley. I've put some white paint on it and lines up with a cut in the front engine housing or the cylinder head housing, just like this one does here. It's almost like, looks like it's about a half a tooth out, but the belt's probably pretty stretched. So there are 5 small 6mm bolts that hold the water pump on, including the 3 motor mount bolts we've already taken out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's 2 dowels, so you have to tap on it and pull it. Here's the old belt, and it actually is in pretty decent shape. There's no micro cracking on the back of the belt. The inside of the belt isn't cracked. Considering this has got 200K on it, that's pretty impressive. The tensioner was leaking a little bit, so it's getting a new tensioner as part of the kit. And of course you get idler and everything in the kit. So there's the water pump installed with the 5 little 6mm bolts and a new gasket. Put dielectric grease on the gasket. It's like an O-ring seal, formed O-ring. Next we're going to put the timing belt. We'll route the timing belt in there, and I see the cams didn't actually move, which is a bonus. So the tensioner pivot is loosely set in there, and the idler is set in. The bolt torque is 33 foot-pounds. That's the same torque for the motor mount big bolts. The water pump 6mm bolts are 8.7 foot-pounds. And we're about ready to install this. This doesn't look right. Oh yeah, it is. I was thinking that this was the ear here. There's actually an adjustment or a tool to hold this thing in the, if you were taking the belt off without removing the tensioner, but we're replacing it. So let's try routing the belt on there now. So there's the belt installed. Notice I used a nylon trim wedge to put pressure on this tensioner, because I don't want to pull this pin until I'm sure that the timing marks are aligned. Otherwise I'll have to remove the tensioner and recompress it again. So I've turned the engine 2 turns now. The timing mark is lined up down here on the crank. We're going to let it down and have a look and see if the cams are lined up now. So here we can see that the timing mark on the front camshaft is lined up, and the timing mark on the back camshaft is lined up as well. So it's good to pull the pin now. That white paint I put on there because I was checking to make sure that the belt was tight. So we're good to pull the pin on the tensioner, turn it a couple turns and double check it one more time, and basically reassemble everything. So the procedure to install this crankshaft pulley bolt is to initially tighten it to 47 foot-pounds and then turn it 60 degrees. So that's why you need this holding fixture. You can't do this without some kind of holding fixture. So I've marked this where that flat is and where that flat is, or that point is on there. So one flat is 60 degrees. I'm going to turn that with a power bar. So like I said, a big power bar. I've turned it, as you can see, one tooth or one flat, so that's 60 degrees. So that's torque. So we can go ahead and put the upper part of this engine apart together. Okay, note to self, put the upper timing covers on before you put the belt tensioner on, because the front one goes underneath the belt tensioner slightly. So if you do put the tensioner on from below first, you'll end up having to partially remove it to get the belt cover back in. So those timing covers back on. Clip this wiring harness back into location. The one in the back is clipped in. Now we're going to put the mount for the ECM and the ECM and the wiring harness all back together. Well, it's pretty much back together. All the belts back on, brackets and ECM reinstalled, wiring harness is all connected. This wire here is an aftermarket wire for a car starter that they routed in and teed into the ECM to pick up probably a tack signal. I left the cruise control servo out because I have to get back there to do the spark plugs. So we're going to go ahead and change the plugs now before we run this engine and get it hot. So there's the 3 plugs out of the front bank. They look remarkably good considering he said they're original. That's got 200K on it. That's amazing. Mind you, they are platinum or double platinum plugs. Yeah. This front coil is a little bit of a challenge to get out because it touches the rad cooling fan, but you can push on the rad cooling fan just ever so slightly, just enough to flex the brackets, and the coil will come out of there. So we're going to go ahead and change the plugs and finish this engine off. So the back 3 plugs look perfectly normal as well. In good shape, actually. We're putting in NGK iridiums, laser iridiums. So put some dielectric grease on the spark plug end of the boot and around this seal and around the perimeter of the connector. Make sure there's no sand in the connector on each one of the coils. I also put never sees on the spark plug threads. This is an old spark plug, but I put never sees on the threads. That's just my personal opinion. I do that with any spark plug that I put in an aluminum head. So there it is, back together and running again. Coolant's full. I actually overfilled the reservoir because I know it's going to burp a little bit. This hose needs to be secured. That's good. New plugs, new antifreeze. I did not change the Serpentine belt because it was like brand new, so we'll return that. Now we do have to do a crankshaft, camshaft variation relearn. So I've never scanned this vehicle before. Normally before doing a job like this I would have checked to see if there's any outstanding codes, but the check engine light wasn't on. He had no complaints about the way it was running. So we'll auto ID it. It's got 200,000 kilometers on it. 200,040 or something like that. If that's the original timing belt, that's amazing how good a shape that was in still. Doesn't look like it's been apart. Well, I don't know why it's not connecting. It's connected to the Bluetooth. We'll pick up when we get there. Well, 200,000. $0.87. Okay. Let's do a code scan. Shouldn't be any codes because, unless there are codes for recently disconnecting the battery, because I had the battery disconnected. Didn't specify key on, engine off, so I have the vehicle running because I want it to warm up. Well, it seems fairly slow. It's 2 computers. CAN communication fault. That's probably because of disconnecting the battery. Left front tire pressure sensor. Did he mention something about the tire pressure sensors on this? Left front, right rear, left rear. So it probably has dead sensors. Powertrain system failure. Communication circuit error. Abnormal battery voltage. Gee, I guess disconnecting that would do that. Well, we're going to make sure we clear all these codes out.
and then do that crankshaft offset relearn, crankshaft camshaft offset relearn. At least that's what it says needs to be done in the service literature. You look in here, maintenance, timing belt installation right at the bottom. Do the crankshaft position, crank pattern clear, crank pattern learn procedure. That's the very last step. Well, actually, I'm doing it before I install the splash shields. Back to the diagnostic suite. We're still scanning computers. I'm not worried about these codes. They're likely caused by me disconnecting the battery. It's not super fast doing a network scan. 15 controllers. Alright, let's go back. The system will keep a report anyways. And clear all codes read by code scan. So it says with key on, engine off. So I'm going to turn the key on, engine off. So here we go with the network code clear. See how quick this is. Usually it's fairly quick. So because I said that, it's going to be slow. Wow. Engine. Yeah, it's going to wow. So I'm going to pause this recording while it's clearing. Thought it didn't give me a list of the controllers this time. It's like it's doing each one individually and then asking me if I'm sure. Now it's going through the individual controllers. That's strange. Okay, so it's cleared the codes out of 15 controllers. We're going to go straight into engine. Functional test. Let's see where it is. Crank pattern clear. Key on, engine off. Continue. Automatic. Erases the crank pattern data stored in the ECM. Use this clear command after repairing a misfire, replacing a crank sensor. Afterward, to do the crank pattern learn procedure to write the new crank pattern to the ECM PCM. Clear the crank pattern? Yes. Start the engine. Turn the ignition off. Turn the switch on. Please wait 30 seconds. Okay. What's going to happen after 30 seconds? Okay, so it's cleared the crank pattern. Refer to the service manual, do the crank pattern learn procedure. Okay, so that's got to be right here. This function performs crank pattern learn with the vehicle parked. If this function is not applicable to the vehicle being serviced, perform the crank pattern learn procedure in the service manual. Vehicle speed 0, in park, neutral, off the standard, coolant temperature above 167, automatic transmission fluid above 113. Well, I might not be hot enough yet, so let's snap the throttle and learn. We'll snap the throttle to learn the crank pattern with the vehicle parked. Do you wish to continue? Continue. Didn't say start the engine. Now it says start the engine. What does it say to do now? Press accelerator pulling into the fuel cutoff. Turn the key off. Start the engine. Oh, it says wait 30 seconds. I wasn't paying attention, trying to read it from 10 feet away. It says wait 30 seconds. I thought it said start the engine. Maybe it did. I got my scanner 20 feet away from the vehicle, so that sometimes causes a glitch. Well, let's see if we got any fault codes now. Might have one for that. I'm letting it do a network code scan again, and it's going through so far 12 computers, and as you can see, no codes in anything. It's not finished yet. I think there was 15 controllers. 13. And make sure that there's no warning lights on and no... Oh, the wipers have its own computer. So we're good to go. So we're just doing a little walk around before we let this vehicle go. This heat shield on the crossover here was falling off, so I secured it with a muffler clamp, or a hose clamp I should say. The shield above the drive shaft had fallen down, so I put a couple of body washers in there. Otherwise, I'm looking at the vehicle and it looks fairly solid. It's a little rusty. Could certainly use an oiling. Looks like it's been used as a grader a couple of times. Some of these brackets are a little bent. That one's bent forward, that one's bent backwards. But you could see the body needs to be oiled to slow down the rust. Don't see any rust coming out of the U-joints. Hanger bearing looks solid. So we're going to take this thing for a road test now.